Imagine turning on the news and hearing the same argument every single day, that the border is either completely out of control, or perfectly manageable, or being exaggerated for political gain, or being ignored altogether. It feels chaotic because everyone seems to be telling a different version of the same story. But here is the real question that almost no one stops to ask. What is actually happening? Underneath the noise, underneath the politics, underneath the slogans. The immigration crisis isn't a simple story of people crossing a border. It's a story woven from desperation, economics, fear, law, history, and political strategy. And once you see all these layers, the entire situation starts to look very different from the way it's usually shown on TV. If you stay with this video, you'll understand why this issue never gets solved, why both parties keep using it as a weapon, and why millions of people find themselves stuck in the middle of a battle they never chose. For many Americans, immigration feels like a problem that suddenly exploded. But the truth is, it has been building for decades. People have been arriving for work, safety, and opportunity long before the current crises made headlines. What changed is the scale, the speed, and the complexity. More people are fleeing violence, poverty, and political instability in their home countries. When entire regions face economic collapse or dangerous conditions, large groups begin moving at once, hoping the U.S. might offer a chance at survival. This creates pressure on the border, on immigration courts, on local cities, and on political systems that were never designed to handle such large waves at the same time. At the same moment, America's internal politics transformed the issue into a national battlefield. For one side, immigration became a symbol of security and order. For the other, it became a symbol of compassion and opportunity. But reality sits somewhere in between those extremes. The country needs workers. The country needs safety. And the country needs a system that respects both law and human dignity. But instead of working toward a solution, both sides often use the crisis to energize their supporters, raise money, and frame their opponents as either too harsh or too weak. The crisis becomes a stage, not a problem to fix. Meanwhile, the system itself is overwhelmed. Courts are backlogged for years. Processing centers are overcrowded. Border communities struggle with sudden population surges. Cities far from the border receive buses of people without resources. And families fleeing danger arrive only to find themselves trapped in a maze of legal procedures, waiting in uncertainty. All of this creates a cycle that feeds frustration on all sides. Some Americans worry about safety and economic strain. Others worry about human rights and compassion. And immigrants worry simply about surviving. One of the biggest reasons the immigration crisis feels unsolvable is that the debate is driven more by emotion than by facts. For some Americans, the idea of large groups arriving at the border triggers fears about security, jobs, or cultural change. For others, images of children, families, and people fleeing danger create a deep emotional call to help. Both reactions are human. Both reactions are understandable. But when a national conversation begins with fear on one side and empathy on the other, the distance between those two emotions becomes almost impossible to bridge. Each group believes their concern is the most urgent, and the result is a political argument where neither side feels heard. The crisis also exposes how deeply divided the country is on the purpose of immigration itself. Some view immigration as a privilege that must be controlled tightly. Others see it as a central part of the American identity, a continuation of the country's history as a place for new beginnings. This difference in worldview shapes every argument. To one side, stricter laws feel like common sense. To the other, they feel like a betrayal of America's spirit. And when an issue touches national identity, compromise becomes much harder. Then there's the economic side, which often gets buried under emotional debates. The United States relies heavily on immigrant labor, agriculture, construction, caregiving, and many service industries depend on workers who come from outside the country. Without immigration, many parts of the economy would slow down or become significantly more expensive. Yet the system for letting workers enter legally is outdated and extremely limited. So demand rises, legal pathways stay narrow, and people turn to dangerous and illegal routes because the legal ones don't exist. This isn't just a border problem. It's an economic design problem that hasn't been updated for modern realities. The legal process adds another layer of difficulty. Seeking asylum is supposed to be a structured, orderly system. But when thousands apply at once, the system breaks down. People who qualify for protection wait years for a hearing. People who don't qualify still wait years because the backlog is so large. This delay creates confusion, frustration, and the perception that the system is out of control. And that perception becomes political fuel. It allows leaders to say the system is broken, even if they have no plan to fix it. It gives media outlets powerful visuals and dramatic stories that keep audiences engaged. And once immigration becomes part of a political identity, it becomes far more valuable as a campaign issue than as a real problem to solve. At the same time, smugglers and criminal networks take advantage of the chaos. They spread misinformation, promising easy entry and quick processing, which pushes even more desperate people toward the border. Families sell everything they own, believing they'll find safety. Many instead find danger, exploitation, or deportation. The cruelty of these networks intensifies the crisis, while governments on both sides struggle to respond effectively. When people hear the phrase immigration crisis, they usually imagine a sudden, chaotic event, something that exploded out of nowhere. But when you look closely, you realize the truth is far more layered. This situation didn't appear overnight, and it didn't come from a single president, a single policy, or a single border decision. It's the result of decades of conflicting strategies, shifting political priorities, and countries across the Western Hemisphere changing faster than the United States could respond. And every time the system reached a breaking point, instead of being rebuilt, it was patched together just enough to survive another year. Behind every border surge is a reason. Some migrants are escaping violence from gangs that took over their towns. Others are fleeing governments that collapsed under corruption. Many are trying to get away from economies where even working full-time doesn't to guarantee food for their families. And there's another side. People who simply see America as a place where their kids might have a fair chance at life. None of these stories excuse illegal entry, but they explain why desperation keeps rising, even when policies get tougher. Inside the U.S., this complexity gets reduced into political weapons. One side claims the country is being overwhelmed and that the border is wide open. The other argues that the system is broken because it was never modernized to match today's realities. Both sides blame each other for the dysfunction, while the actual system, overloaded courts, understaffed processing centers, outdated laws, struggles to handle the pressure. And in the middle of that fight are real people. Border agents working exhausting hours, small border towns trying to manage temporary shelters, and migrants who find themselves trapped in bureaucratic limbo for months or years. But here's the part almost no one talks about: the demand inside the United States. Industries like agriculture, construction, hospitality, caregiving, trucking, and manufacturing quietly depend on immigrant labor to survive. Businesses know it. Washington knows it. Voters often don't. And because the legal immigration system is slow, rigid, and outdated, undocumented workers end up filling roles that the economy desperately needs, but the law can't provide in a clean, simple way. It's a contradiction at the heart of the crisis, one that leaders from both parties have avoided addressing because the political cost is high. So when people ask, why can't this just be fixed? The real answer is that the crisis isn't one issue. It's many issues stacked on top of each other. Foreign instability, outdated laws, economic demand, partisan politics, overwhelmed courts, and millions of individual stories of fear, hope, and survival. And the longer the country avoids addressing all of these layers at the same time, the more the crisis continues to grow. And now we reach the truth everyone debates, but very few actually understand. When Americans argue about immigration, they imagine it as a fight between two sides. But in reality, there are more forces shaping the crisis than anyone admits. The economy, corporations, border enforcement agencies, international politics, and the American political parties all push the system in different directions. And the result is a problem that keeps repeating itself every decade, almost as if it's designed to never be solved. The question is, who benefits from keeping it this way? For corporations, the answer is simple. They want workers. Millions of Americans don't want certain jobs that are physically demanding, low-paying, or seasonal. Immigrants, especially undocumented ones, often step into those roles. Without them, entire industries would slow down or collapse. Agriculture, construction, hospitality, meatpacking, caregiving. The backbone of many U.S. sectors depends on labor that many citizens refuse. So while politicians argue on television, companies lobby quietly behind the scenes to keep that labor flowing. And here's the twist. They argue for enforcement publicly, but lobby privately to avoid changes that would restrict their workforce. This contradiction ensures the system remains stuck. Then there's the political angle. Both major parties talk about immigration constantly because it energizes their supporters. One side highlights national security. The other side highlights humanitarian responsibility. Each side tells a different story, and both stories contain some truth. But neither side wants to give up the political power that comes from having a never-ending debate. When a problem becomes this valuable, solving it stops being the priority. Managing it becomes the strategy. And we can't ignore the push and pull forces outside the U.S. Millions leave their home countries because of violence, poverty, corruption, or lack of opportunity. When those conditions worsen abroad, more people head for the American border. And no matter how many walls are built or laws are passed, desperation finds a way. People risk their lives crossing deserts and rivers, not because it's easy, but because staying behind feels even more dangerous. So the crisis is not only American, it's global. Meanwhile, the American people are caught in the middle, hearing fragments instead of full explanations. Some worry about safety and cultural change. Others worry about compassion and human rights. And both groups are reacting to something real. The problem is not the emotions. The problem is that the nation is debating symptoms, not causes. And as long as that continues, nothing changes. But here's the real question. If the immigration crisis benefits corporations, energizes political parties, and originates from global struggles far outside the reach of U.S. lawmakers, then is it truly a problem the country wants to solve, or one it has learned to live with? And if you've made it this far, stay with me, because the next episode will break down exactly what could happen if the U.S. actually tried to fix this issue once and for all. If you want that breakdown, tell me you're ready, and I'll create it.